awakened group response. I'm guessing, I just heard Gustavo just self-disclosed, right? I'm guessing some of you were playing till 1 a.m. And that's okay. But hopefully we have enough energy for what we have to cover today. As Marla said, my name is Josue. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, but I am also our church and community relations manager at Redeemer Housing. And really all that means is that I get to be the liaison between the body of Christ and Redeemer Counseling and making sure that the church has gospel-centered resources so that we can care well for those that God has put in the ministries where we serve. And so I'm thankful, as Ellen said, for the invitation that Cheech and that Marla gave us to be here with you. We love Redeemer Downtown. We love what you guys are doing. And the fact that you would be willing to give up a weekend to drive or commute all the way to Princeton to be here on a weekend, to wake up early and be at a session by 9 o'clock when you can be doing other things, right? This shows where your heart is at, what you're willing to invest in, and so we're so thankful that we can be here. So let me just do a quick check-in, and I'm curious, if I didn't use a mic, can you hear me in the back? Yeah. And, okay, all right, I'll stick to the mic.
David has bad ears.
Oh, okay. Let's just do a quick check-in. I would love just to see where we're at this morning, and so by a thumbs up, you're going to tell me that you're doing really well, you're energized, you're happy, you're excited to be here. If your thumb goes to the side, it's all right. It's just another Saturday morning. Or it's possible that today's a thumbs down morning and you're not doing so well. So can I just see, how are you doing this morning by showing me your thumbs? Overall, who had the shortest thumb yesterday, by the way? Oh, that's crazy. That's crazy. I know what I missed it. All right, so overall, we are doing well. One of the things before we begin, just to piggyback a little bit on what Cheech said as we started, Ellen mentioned this, is that as we engage the content, we realize that we're taking a deep dive into things that we typically don't do, or things that we don't always talk about, or things that might be new for us. And so we want to make sure that you know you have the permission to take good care of yourself throughout the day, which means whenever your body, right, your sympathetic nervous system gets activated and you might need to take a sip of water or take a walk or go to the restroom, whatever it is, please feel free to take good care of yourself. And one of the things that Ellen said yesterday is that we want to approach, our stories with compassion, with humility as we listen to others. Well, I want to give you permission and ask that you would exercise that same humility and compassion towards yourself as you begin to unfold more of your story, and as you begin to see the good things in your story, and also the not so good things. Let's not be so harsh on ourselves as we come to certain realizations over the next few hours. So please take good care of yourselves and exercise some of that humility and compassion towards yourself. Can we do that? Yeah. Oh, and here's the last thing. I want to give you permission that if you see your neighbor taking a little snooze, that you say, hey sunshine, come back, all right? That you just get their attention very nicely so that we're all together, all right? So, as we continue our workshop this morning, right, the focus of this retreat is to grow into wisdom as we care well for others and also for ourselves. And yesterday, we said that between yesterday and today, we want to do two things. We want to understand ourselves, and we did that through embodied souls. And we're going to do that through this morning's workshop as we learn about our approach, so that then we can accomplish the second objective, right? Which is learning how to minister well to others. We're going to talk about trauma-informed care, and then we are going to talk about what it looks like to listen well to others, to know how to engage in conversation. And so for this morning, I have the privilege, and I would also say a little bit of the daunting task, my sympathetic nervous system gets activated when I teach this, to introduce to you the gospel-centered integrated framework for therapy, which is our approach at Redeemer Counseling and how we make sense and how we care for others. So can we do something together? Can we all say this mouthful together? And then we're just going to refer to it moving forward as gift. All right, but let's say together, gospel-centered integrated framework for therapy. Awesome. Moving forward, I will refer to that as gift. And so we're going to be gifted today with this approach And the reason why we want to do that is because we want to be able to really make sense of ourselves, of our stories, but also of those that we journey with. And we got to figure out a way to help understand. Oh, remember this web of complexity that Ellen shared yesterday? It can feel a little daunting, right? To say, what do we do with this? How do we make sense of all the intricacies that make us who we are? And so walking with people, sometimes, as we get to know their story, it feels like stepping into this office. And I don't know about you, but this office produces a little bit of anxiety in me. And my gut reaction, in all honesty, is to want to shut the door and to say, I'm not going to step into it. This is way too messy for me. But if we can find a way to journey with people so that we can begin to make sense of all the papers that are everywhere, their unique stories, their challenges, their trials, their triumphs, in a way that feels a little bit more organized, that feels like we know how to take steps forward, then I think it would be a lot easier to journey with people. And so in a lot of ways, the gift, I want us to think about it as a framework, as an organizational tool that's going to really help us make sense of those that we journey with. So that's our hope for today. And yesterday, Ellen said that we were going to try to answer 3 questions, right, to understand ourselves better. Do you guys remember what those 3 questions were? Who we are? Yeah.
What's our problem?
What's our problem? And
What's the solution?
what is the solution? Awesome. So we are going to continue to answer those questions for today. And the only reason why I added a parenthesis is because I don't want you to forget that as we're listening and as we're engaging in this content, I want you to ask yourself also, who am I? And what's my problem? And also, thankfully, what's the solution to my problem? Right? We want to understand ourselves well as we also get to know others. And so yesterday, Ellen began to answer those questions from a psychological perspective. Right? And we learned a lot of good stuff about who we are from that lens. But today we want to continue to answer those questions from a theological perspective as well. You'll notice that in the gift we have that letter I, right? This integrative word, because we never want to answer these questions without considering both perspectives. We do want to see the human complexities of individuals from a psychological lens, but we never want to do it in the absence of understanding and seeing it from what Scripture says, right? And a theological perspective. So this morning I'm going to answer these questions from a theological perspective. So let's start with this first question. Who are we? Let me just get a poll here. How many of you have wrestled with this question? Who am I really? Good. Have any of you found good answers, by the way? We're in the process. This question is a question that we are all really wrestling through, and I would say it's a question that you'll probably hear people in one way, shape, or form try to answer throughout their life. And we're going to talk a little bit about why that is. But oftentimes we'll hear theologians or we'll hear pastors say that if you want to understand anything well, you need to run it through the lens of the meta-biblical narrative of the story of God and mankind. And so as we begin to answer these 3 questions, I briefly want us to remember this story. And in all honesty, I could probably spend the rest of the day just talking about the story, but I won't, right? Jesus, you'll keep me accountable to that. But I want to just make sure that we're all on the same page as to what this story is. And so when we think about these 3 questions, we do so in light of remembering that in creation, chapter 1, God creates this world. He designed it beautifully, and God gave us our identities, He gave us our purpose, He gave us a blueprint of how life was meant to be. A world that would be beautifully interdependent on Him as we get to exercise intimacy and relationship with Him and with others. But we know that chapter 2 of this story happens fairly quickly, and we see that the fall occurs, right? The disobedience of Adam and Eve, and what happens, sin enters into this world, and there's a separation that occurs between us and God. And we welcome the suffering, we welcome the chaos of this world. But because God loves us too much, praise God for chapter 3. Where we see Him set into motion this salvific mission to redeem us, to bring us back to Him, where we get to meet Jesus, the the gospel, the good news, and we are redeemed, we are reconciled through him. He takes our place on the cross. He bears our sin. He literally, what does he do? He drags us out of the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light so that we can once again have a relationship with God our Father, with our Creator. And we are now in this chapter 4 where we await with great hope the completion of that salvific mission, where one day we'll get to enjoy again in perfect intimacy our relationship with our Father. That is the story of God and of mankind. And so for today, we're going to focus a lot on chapters 1 and chapters 2 of this story. So as we begin to answer who are we, here are 3 things. And I'm going to just fill in some color because Ellen already gave you this, right? So again, we're answering the same question from a different lens. And so one of the things that we need to know about who we are is that we are social beings. And we see in Genesis 1:26, it says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Right? We're noticing us, our, these plural words, more than one, as God is a Trinitarian God. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. He is relational and social. He's made us after his likeness. And we then see in Genesis 2 that it says, "It is not good that the man should be alone." Notice that up to this point, everything that God made was what? How was it described? Good. It was good. But what is the first thing that we see was not good? That man was alone. And I gotta say, this verse and what God is saying, it goes beyond just saying or speaking to marriage. I think what he's talking to is about the fact that we are meant to be in relationship with others, and because we are social beings. And so he's highlighting the fact that we shouldn't do life alone and we need others. So the first truth that we see in the creation account is that we're social beings. The second one, just as a quick reminder, is that we are embodied souls, right? We got an hour and a half of what that means yesterday. But we see it in scripture. In Genesis 2:7, right? It says, "God formed the man of the dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life." And what I really want to highlight from what Ellen said yesterday is that as embodied souls, we are more interconnected within than what we know. Right? There is nothing that happens in our soul, there's nothing we can think or feel without it registering somewhere in our body. And inversely, right? Whatever occurs in our body deeply, deeply, deeply impacts our soul. So we are social beings, we are embodied souls. And the last thing I want us to know about who we are that we see in Scripture, which is super important for us this morning, is that we are derived identities. So what do I mean by that? Notice that in creation, as God makes everything, he says it's good. But he does something else with Adam, right? He actually engages with Adam and has a relationship with him and actually talks to him. Genesis 1:28, "Then God said," Genesis 2, "the Lord commanded the man." And I want you to pay attention that Adam, up to this point, right, this is pre-fall, he's in a flawless state. Yet, although he's in a flawless state, he's still not all-knowing. He needs someone, he needs his creator to give him that sense of identity, to give him that sense of purpose. Adam is meant to know who he was in light of being in relationship with his creator, which means you and I have this imprint within us where we are meant to know who we are from something outside of ourselves. And it's supposed to be God. Unfortunately, because we live in the fallen world, right? Oftentimes we're trying to figure out who we are through other things, and we get it wrong. But God designed us to know who we are, our purpose, our identity outside of ourselves, and he was meant to tell us that. And so to help us understand what we're talking about here in creation, here's a chart that we've outlined that helps us to see that we are, again, social beings, we are embodied souls, we are derived identities. And if we fast forward to the end of the creation account in Genesis 2, in the very last verses, it says that the man and his wife were both naked, but they felt no shame. In some ways, this is the climax of the creation story. They are united with perfect intimacy and are experiencing safety with one another. They're experiencing that intimacy and communion with God. And I don't know about you, but what a beautiful way to end that creation account and to reflect that that is what God designed for us. That is the picture of perfect health. Are we tracking so far with creation and who we are? Good, because now we got to jump into chapter 2. And we're going to spend a good amount in chapter 2 because we really got to answer this question, what is the problem? And because remember, we are also looking at ourselves, I got to ask myself, Josue, what is my problem? And boy, oh boy, do I have a problem, and we have a problem. And so let me just ask you, what do we know about the fall, right? We know that Adam and Eve disobeyed God, but what happens as a result of the fall? What do they do? What are the consequences of their disobedience? Can you guys help me out here?
They hide.
What was that?
They hide.
They hide, right? So they go into hiding. Good.
They point fingers.
Okay, they blame each other, they point fingers. Good. What else?
They deny responsibility.
Excellent. They deny responsibility.
God has to clothe them.
What was that?
God has to clothe
God
them.
has to clothe them, right? Interesting. The first death that we see, a human animal sacrifice, right? Foreshadowing. But right before God clothed them, what did they try to do? They try to clothe themselves as well, right? Using some fig leaves, right? So what we see as a result of the fall in Genesis 3, verses 7 and 8, it shows us that Adam and Eve now know that they're naked, and so they sewed fig leaves, and they also went into hiding, right? Hiding from God, but also hiding from each other. There's this deep separation that occurs between them and their Creator. So that loss of innocence is really the problem. And now we have shame. This inherent notion that there's something deeply, deeply wrong and flawed with us that then leads us to hiding or that leads us to covering up. In some ways, Adam and Eve used fig leaves as a very rudimentary way of trying to redeem that sense of shame in that moment, to make themselves feel better or to address the problem. And you and I also have a system within that tries to accomplish the same thing, that tries to redeem our sense of shame, our sense of brokenness. And so in the fall, we now have shame, right? That occurs from separating from God, separating from each other. And what's worse, right, in the alienation is that now creation is also broken and fallen. And we experience tragedies and calamities, the chaos of this world that you and I know all too well, that we're having to face day in and day out. And what we try to do in this fallen state is that we try to address that shame by trying to make ourselves feel better. Mankind tried and tries to take things into their own hands to address this problem. And so at Redeemer Counseling, we call that approach that man has to address their problem as the system of self-redemption. Okay, so can you say that with me also? The system of self-redemption. We're going to refer to this as the SOS. Okay? And so this is our way of replacing God. Unfortunately, instead of turning to God, right, the source of our derived identity, you remember what happened in the garden after Adam and Eve hid and covered up? What did God ask? Where are you? Right? Not because he lost them like we lose kids in convenience stores, right? But because, personal experience, my own trauma, during Christmas, I think it was Macy's on 34th. I still love my parents, we're in great shape now, but it's scary. Instead of turning to God and saying, God, I went against what you told me, and I have a problem here, and I need your help, right? We try to address that issue on our own by covering or by hiding. It's a way of trying to redeem ourselves. And part of what we got to notice is that the sin itself was a way of replacing God. You remember that they were told not to eat from the fruit of what? Yeah, of knowledge of good and evil, right? And so they were basically, by disobeying God, right, rejecting the notion that God has to be the one to tell them who they are. They were basically saying, I'm going to decide that for myself. And so we, from the very start, in some ways, we're on this quest for self-sufficiency and self-reliance. And we know that this system of self-redemption doesn't work. It actually just leads to even further shame, further sense that there's something deeply wrong with us. So I want to help us understand what this looks like, right? This is how we conceptualize the problem in our approach. And so we are going to look at this chart, and in fact, in your handouts, you have one as well. If it's easier for you to look, you can turn to page number 9 and have that ready. Okay. So when people go to you and invite you to journey with them, usually people go to you because there's something wrong in their life, right? They're going through some sort of crisis, some situation. They're not doing well in the moment. An example, right? Like, I just got into a fight with my spouse, or my kids are really acting up, or my job is really draining me. There's some sort of situation, if you will, that needs to be addressed in that moment. And whenever we have a situation like we see here, we know that all our situations lead us to have a reactive emotion. Some sort of feelings get prompted through that, right? Our nervous systems get activated, right? We begin to feel something. We react to the situation. But our emotions then lead us to do something. So our emotions lead us to have a behavioral reaction, which, as we learned yesterday, we either fight, right, which means we engage the situation, we might flight, which means we try to avoid or escape, run away from the situation, or at times we freeze and we're kind of stuck in that situation. And so all our situations lead us to a reactive emotion that then leads us to a behavioral reaction. So as an example, right, my situation, or the situation we hear, is that our partner just left a note saying that they're leaving us after many years of being in a relationship. And that might prompt me to feel sad, to feel mad, maybe even feel betrayed. And now my behavioral reaction is to initially ignore all the calls, to not want to talk to this person. Or on another day, go home and throw everything out that ever belonged to that person. Right? We can vacillate between our responses. So that is how we see the situation, leading to reactive emotion, to behavioral reaction. And we call these parts of our system of self-redemption the conscious parts of the SOSR. For the most part, people have an idea of this. They can see their situation, they can, for the most part, know how they're feeling about it, and therefore know what they are, how they're behaving, okay? So before I show you the other elements, I want us to reflect on our own stories in life, and maybe where you're at today. And I want you to think about your own present situation. What is the situation, maybe the ongoing struggle that you're facing, that you're working through? Maybe it is a conflict in your relationship. It might be jealousy with a friend. It might be a job that just seems to stress the heck out of you. It might be your new leadership role at CG, and you're still trying to figure it out, and it just intimidates you. Whatever it is, can you take a few minutes to think about your present situation? And then think about what emotions surface for you as you face that situation. And lastly, how are you responding to that? What's your behavioral reaction to that? So I'm going to give you 2 or 3 minutes. If we can begin to fill out on page number 9, present situation, reactive emotion, and behavioral reaction. Sound good? See you in 3 minutes. get a chance to come back to this in a bit. But where we are so far, right? We're in answering the question, what's the problem? And we said that the problem, the way we conceptualize the problem is that we have this system of self-redemption, right? To address the shame, experience of brokenness. And so these elements, again, are the conscious elements. For the most part, we have an idea of how we're at, which is why you could do this exercise right now, right? You have enough awareness of where you're at, who you are to be able to answer this. But if you notice, on the SOSR, there are other elements also present. And these elements are ones that we would say are the unconscious elements of the SOSR, which is our view of self, our core hurts, our past experiences, and our strategies. These things are also at play, and these things are deeply informing our situation, they're deeply informing our emotional, our reactive emotion, and our behavioral reaction. Which is why sometimes we do things that don't really make sense to us, right? Or people do things and share things with us that don't really make sense to us. You're like, why did you just react the way that you did to that? Right? And we kind of almost lean in a little bit towards judgment. And so I want to walk us through what these deeper unconscious components of the SOS are. And we're going to start with what is smack in the middle, which is what we call the view of self, right? Earlier we said that as a result of the fall, we experienced this disconnection from God. And we now have this inherent sense of shame, right? There's something that's wrong with us. So that's the spiritual reality that we all face. But it's going to be different for every one of us what those shame messages are. This I am blank is going to look different for each one of us. Because due to our experiences of pain and suffering and our past experience that just happened because we live in a fallen world, we develop these core hurts. And the way I like to think of core hurts are like these deep imprints of relational woundedness that then personalize our shame messages. So we all have this shame message, this view of self, but that is deeply informed by our experiences of our core hurts. Right? And our core hurts develop because of our past experiences, these relational wounds that get repeated and reinforced time and time again. So to give you an example, if I'm the child of a really busy parent, okay, who didn't have a lot of time to spend with me growing up, I might experience that relationship, and the wound I might get from that relationship is feeling really uncared for, or maybe even rejected. And because we're meaning makers, the way that I make sense of that hurt is to say, well, it must just mean that I'm unworthy, or I'm not noticeable to others. Right? That's how that shame gets particularized, because of that hurt. But maybe to give you an example, another example, a child might have a present parent, but receives a lot of criticism. There's always this bar that they need to measure up against. And that, what happens is that the core hurt that gets developed in that is always feeling devalued, or feeling criticized, or feeling judged. And so the way I made sense of that, whenever I experience feeling judged, devalued, criticized, is that I'm just never good enough, or I'm inadequate. So we're seeing how our unique core hurts, our unique experiences are going to shape our views of self, which is why we all have a different view of self. Does that make sense? Yeah, we're tracking? And because none of us then likes pain, none of us like shame, like Adam and Eve, what do? We develop strategies throughout our lifetime to make sure that we don't experience any of it. That we can soothe the core hurts that come up, that we can soothe the shame messages that surface. We try to hide, and we also try to sow our own fig leaves. And these fig leaves are what we call these idolatrous strategies, right? This box here on the left. And we try to use these strategies as a way of coping with our circumstances, and we try to use these strategies to justify ourselves, to redeem ourselves, believing that we are okay, or we're not that bad, or we're just trying to numb the pain and hide from the reality of suffering. So these strategies becomes the thing that we try to hang on to, and where oftentimes we try to derive our identities from, to address that sense that there's something that's wrong with us. And again, we have particular ways in which we use our faith beliefs that depend on our unique stories, our experiences, our personalities, what we learn from our parents. And so as we think about idolatry strategies, we're more familiar, and I'm going to break it down just so that we can understand this concept a bit better. We're oftentimes more familiar with what we know as surface idols, which are the tangible things that we tend to use to make ourselves feel better, like getting good grades, having a good job, making money, being in relationships with others. But these surface idols are just experiences or manifestations of what we call the deeper idol, which are the strategies that we use to redeem our broken sense of self. And these deeper idols can be categorized by power, by control, by approval, and comfort. Now, I realize I'm talking to Redeemer Downtown, so I'm guessing this is very familiar to you. I'm just curious, how many of you have heard of the deeper idols before? Okay, excellent. Good amount of you, right? And so the truth is that all of us can have these 4 strategies within. We exercise all of these strategies, but we typically have a default strategy, one that we use the most. And again, a lot of what our default strategy is depends on our history, depends on our upbringing, depends on what was modeled to us. But these deeper idols are enduring versus the surface idols that we have tend to change from time to time, right? So let me give you an example of what that looks like. Let's say that my deeper idol, my strategy to redeem my shame and my brokenness is comfort. I really have this over-desire to avoid pain, to avoid stress in my life. And growing up, the way that was expressed, my surface idol was by playing Tetris and by playing Pac-Man, right? Someone chuckled, 100%. Thankfully, my brain is fully developed by my age. And that was what I used as a kid. But let's say as I became an adolescent, now I use Call of Duty and Fortnite. I'm a little older and that becomes it. But as I get older now, gambling is also a source of my comfort. And drugs become a source of my comfort, right? You notice how the surface idol changed as I got older. But my over-desire for comfort, for the avoidance of pain, that strategy didn't change. That endured. Or let's say that approval was my deeper idol. This over-desire to appease others in order to feel affirmed was my strategy to redeem my brokenness. As a kid, I really needed mom and dad to be okay with me, right? I wanted that gold star from them. I really needed to know that they were okay with me, that when they yelled at me, I could then go and hug them. And I did a lot of things to try to make sure that we were good, and always did what they told me, even if it was at my own detriment at times. But as I got older, while I still want approval, and that's how I go about redeeming myself now, who I want that approval for looks different. And now I might try to appease my boss at work. I might try to appease my partner or my spouse, or even my church leader and my pastor, and making sure that I'm good in their book and I do what they tell me to, right? So we can see the difference, right? Our strategy, how we go about redeeming ourselves, these deeper idols endure while our surface idol changes. So I'm going to cover this in greater depth in a little bit, but I want us just to make sure that we're seeing the big picture. So far, what we said is that we have these conscious components in the SOSR, right? These present situations that lead us to a reactive emotion and a behavioral reaction. But then there are these things that are at play that really impact, right? It's our view of self, our core hurts, our past experiences, these strategies. And you see, in a lot of ways, our situations occur whenever our strategies are failing us. So whenever our strategies fail, what happens is that our core hurts and our view of self get triggered, re-triggered, and now we are reacting to that strategy failing and to all of this being surfaced and coming up to the forefront. And that is why we are in that reactive state. So let me give you an example of what this looks like, right? And I'll use my own example. So I'm the kid who grew up with a busy parent. I'm sure many of us can relate. My father was or is a pastor, so I'm a PK, and he was a pastor of a very large church in New York City, and he worked a lot. I always said he was at church 8 days a week. And part of what that then led me to feel, one of the core hurts I developed by having a father who was always busy in ministry, was that oftentimes I did feel uncared for, or I felt devalued in our relationship. And the way that I made sense of it, how the shame messages that developed, was just that I was not good enough. I was always someone's second choice. And that was the message that I learned to believe about myself. And so how I cope with that growing up was to develop the deeper idol of control, this over-desire for certainty, of making sure that everything was right, that I exceeded the standard, that I exceeded really my father's standard. And what happened, ironically, by God's grace and providence, is that I also entered ministry. And I studied pastoral ministry in college, pursued my master's in marriage and family therapy. But what happened over time, because I hadn't dealt with the core hurts of being uncared for, devalued, the shame messages, is that I found myself really overburdened in ministry. And I found myself feeling really stressed every time I would have to teach or preach or lead a group of people. And any time that I did something like that, and it didn't go to plan, or I said the wrong thing, or people offered criticism, that was my situation, it would lead me to feel super anxious, feel super worried, feel super overwhelmed. And then what I would do when we hear a reaction, I would work harder. If I prep 3 hours, I'm gonna prep 6 hours, right? Ellen knows, she's seen my development over time, right? My 20-page manuscript, I said, how are we gonna do this right? Or I would eventually say, you know what, forget about it. I'm just not gonna do nothing. And almost go into like a depressive state and walk away from the thing that I was doing. That is how my system of self-redemption came together. My experience of brokenness of her developed a shame message. I figured out a way to try to redeem that on my day-to-day. But when that strategy fails me, I find myself in this reactive state. Does that make sense? Do we see a little bit better how our system of self-redemption is operating? Okay. Any thoughts, comments, questions before we continue? Yes, ma'am.
You know, you're using the word self-redemption. I just don't see that you're redeeming yourself if these strategies that you have fail and go into the core hurts. All I can see is a groove getting deeper, and the messages you give yourself about who you are getting more entrenched.
Yeah, I think that's the sad part of it, right? Is that none of it actually gets fixed, right? So we think, if only I exercise, in my case, if only I can exercise enough control, right? If only I can cross all my T's and dot my I's, I will feel good about myself. Or if it's approval, if only I can have people affirm me, if only, right? And I try really hard to feel better about myself, to soothe the pain, to fix these messages, then it's worth it. But you're right, these strategies don't work. On their own, they're not bad things, but when they become ultimate things, when Jesus is never part of this picture to say, Josue, your core hurt of feeling devalued and uncared for, I'm gonna heal that. I'm gonna show you my presence. I'm gonna make sure that you know that I'm your Father who deeply loves and cares for you. You don't need to exercise this control to heal that. You know how you always feel like you're no one's first choice? Guess who predetermined that you were gonna be mine before the foundations of this world? It was me. And I want you to know that. Right? So Christ, you're right, is the only one that can redeem that. But when we don't welcome Christ, and that's the reality, we don't usually welcome Christ, or we're not actively always welcoming Christ, then we try to do that on our own. Does that help a bit? Yeah. I'm glad you pointed it out. It's an unending vicious cycle when we try to do things on our own. Yes?
Do people only have one deeper idol, or we all have all of them?
Yeah, good question. So we have all of them. we can vacillate, right? We can use sprinkles of them, but we firmly believe that there's typically a default strategy, one that's most dominant in how we've tried to develop, how we've tried to redeem our core hurts and our view of self. And there's typically, I'm going to break it down in just a little bit, a deeper idol of, we break it down into mastery idols, power and control, so things that we do to exert our goodness, or avoidance idols, which are approval and comfort. We try to kind of hide and not show that we're not good. And so we tend to, at times, have one of each of those. But yes, we have a more dominant idols, although they're all embedded within us. So, let's do this. Are energy levels okay? You feel like we can continue? Yeah? Okay. So I would love for us to now look at someone's life and actually get to explore someone's system of self-redemption. Okay? We're going to do a case study. And because it's Saturday morning, and I don't know about you, but I grew up watching cartoons, specifically Disney Channel on Saturday morning. So we're going to look at a Disney character. All right? And so I want to know how many of you have seen the movie Frozen? Yes. Did someone say, I'm sorry, you're sick. Your parenting wounds are being triggered right now. So we are going to look at the story of Elsa. Now, for the few people who have not watched Frozen, let me just catch us up to the clip that we're going to see. All right, Elsa is the princess of Arendelle, right? And she has powers to control ice and snow and some other natural elements. And she also has a sister named Anna, and they are super, super close. They're best friends, they adore each other. But one day, they decide that they are going to make a winter wonderland in the castle, which is how I know they're not at Lido, because there's no playing in the house like that. Anyway, they're making this castle, and accidentally, right, Elsa, with her powers, hits Anna. And Anna is now unconscious, and she's hurt. And so her parents are freaking out. They're trying to figure out, how do I make Anna better? And so they go to find someone that can help heal Anna, all right? So that's where we're gonna pick up on this clip. Now, as you watch this clip, all right, what I want you to do is to think about the impact that this scene, that this moment has on Elsa. And how is her system of self-redemption beginning to get shaped in light of this experience that she's had? Okay? I promise you, you will never see Elsa the same way after this. Alright? So how is Elsa's system of self-redemption being shaped in light of what is happening to her? Okay? And I'm going to ask you about what her core hurts are, what her view of self, maybe even what's her strategy that begins to get developed as a result. All right, we're ready? And thank you, Marla.
It's the king. Shush, I'm trying to listen. Cuties, I'm gonna keep you. Your Majesty, born with the powers or cursed?
Born, and they're getting stronger.
You were lucky it wasn't her heart. The heart is not so easily changed, but the head can be persuaded.
Do what you must.
I recommend we remove all magic, even memories of magic, to be safe. But don't worry, I leave the fun. She will be okay.
Don't you all remember I have powers?
It's for the best. Listen to me, Elsa. Your power will only grow. There is beauty in it, but also great danger. You must learn to control it. Fear will be your enemy.
No. We'll protect her. She can learn to control it, I'm sure. Till then, lock the gates. We'll reduce the staff. We'll limit her contact with people. Keep her powers hidden from everyone, including Anna.
So, I want to hear from you before I ask you some very specific questions. What stood out to you as you watched this clip? How was Elsa impacted by this? Maybe 2 or 3 that can just highlight something that stood out to you as significant.
Something's wrong with her?
So you're saying that's what she's hearing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something's wrong with her.
Good. So Elsa, in some ways, in this moment, is learning through this experience that there's something wrong with her. Okay. Others, what stood out as significant to you for this clip?
She has to hide.
She has to hide, literally, right? Close the castles. We'll keep her away from people. Go into hiding.
And maybe that, like, there's
She was sacrificed. Tell me more. To help Anna, right? She needed to be sacrificed.
others are valued more than her. Sort of connected.
Yeah, others are being valued more than she is. Excellent. We're really. There is something inherently wrong with you, right? And it's very explicit. They're all saying it, right? Yes, sir.
Denial, they remit the memory.
Okay. That's a good one, right? And what's worse, we're not going to talk about this. In fact, Anna wouldn't even be able to remember any of it. Right? Doesn't it sound very familiar with trauma in our own lives, with family systems at times? Just keep it over there, right? I'll talk about it. Good point.
Her parents imposed this on her.
Yeah, her parents imposed this on her, like to harm her, not with the intention to harm her, right? To help her out. They don't want anything bad to happen to her. Nonetheless, we see the impact of it, right? But her parents had a very active role in this process for sure. Yeah.
But it's too much responsibility for a child.
It is. Yeah. And so the parents did the best that they could to try to shield some of that for her. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Her powers are to be seen with a fearful lens, right? Be afraid of your power.
It's very interesting because it says fear will be your enemy, but in the meanwhile, he's instilling fear, right?
Yeah. Good. Last one. Yes, ma'am.
And she may not interpret what had happened in the same way that her parents interpret what had happened. So, what's her point of view and how is she processing it?
Excellent. Yes. How they're interpreting this can be very different, are very different, right? Which is exactly what we do. We interpret our experiences, each of us, very uniquely, right? And this is exactly how our view of self gets shaped. All right, you guys are on it. I love it. So let's answer some questions as we think about the impact of Elsa. And the first question I want us to answer together is, what is Elsa's core hurt? What is that imprint of relational woundedness that is getting shaped in her life, that is getting formed in her life in this moment? And if that's hard to see, you can go to page 11, and in the middle of page 11, on point 2, you're going to have a list of core hurts. And so I want you to briefly look at these words, and then Ellen's going to help me type in some of the words that you choose. All right. So based off the word bank that you see on page 11, and there might be words that are not on there that we can also consider, what do you think are some of the core hurts that are being developed for for Elsa?
Abandonment.
Abandonment. Okay, so she's feeling abandoned. Others? Rejected, yeah. And you said, oh, rejected, okay. So abandoned, rejected. Judged, for sure. Good amount of judgment. Excluded, right? Everyone else can keep on with their life, but she's got to go into hiding. Yeah. Blamed. That's a good one. Yeah, she's being blamed. Her powers are being blamed. Okay. Any other ones that you want to include? Yeah.
Denied.
Denied.
Being denied.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Good. I think those are good words for us to consider as she is experiencing this, right? This experience is leading her to feel and therefore develop these core hurts of being rejected, abandoned, blamed, denied, judged, and excluded. Right? And we said that our core hurts then are interpreted, right? Because I've just experienced this, it must be because I am blank. So, flip over to the next page in your book, page 12, and now look at a word bank of views of self. How is Elsa making sense of this? Right? We don't know, right? She hasn't come into our office yet, but how might she be talking about herself as a result? What are some words you would choose? I am what? Okay, so you said I am unlovable, unacceptable, bad, defective, a pariah. I was gonna say, good luck spelling it. Or a monster, maybe. Yeah. Any others? Cursed. Remember the question in the beginning, born with, right, or cursed? Yeah. Okay. She might see herself as cursed.
Disposable.
Disposable. I am disposable. My guess is that we can probably come up with a good amount of views of self, right? And this is just based off one experience. So Elsa, in her experience, she hurts Anna. Her powers are blamed, right? She feels rejected, blamed, denied, abandoned, judged, excluded. And as a result, she is seeing herself as unlovable, bad, unacceptable, a monster, a pariah, cursed, and disposable. Yeah, we are seeing the formation in front of us of a system of self-redemption. We're tracking so far? Yeah. And so part of what we also said was that we now need to do something about this, right? In the absence of welcoming Jesus in that very moment to address what was going on, we take matters into our own hands, right? And we develop these strategies to try to redeem what's going on. And so I'm going to break down a little bit further. Thank you, Ellen, for capturing that for us. I'm going to explain a little bit more of the deeper idols before we watch the next clip, okay? And I would love for us just to consider the idols in these categories. And by the way, you can read more on the deeper idols through the book, Counterfeit Gods, right? You know, Lee and Josue Calderon wrote that very awesome book for us to explore and dive into. So let me help us explain our deeper idols a bit more so that we can also guess which strategy Elsa was developing. Okay? So the deeper idols we can break down into the first two categories of mastery and avoidance. It's a little bit of what I was sharing before. The idols, the strategies of power and control are ones that we consider as mastery idols. Okay? They're ways that we are trying to assert that we're good. And so for those who have power as their strategy, they have this over desire to influence or to have success over others, right? They're asserting their goodness in that way. Or for those who have control as their deeper idol, the way we try to do it and assert our goodness is by exercising high levels of responsibility, of standards, of making sure that we do things right and with excellence. And we need things to be done that way, right? So they're mastery idols to assert our goodness. The other category then are avoidant is an avoidant category. And here is where we try to hide that we're not good. And so comfort is an avoidant strategy, and comfort is the over desire for the avoidance of pain or stress. I'm not going to think about it, life is good, ignorance is bliss, I'm not going to show up to anything really. Whereas approval is also an avoidant idol. And the strategy there is to appease others in order to receive affirmation, and other people determine that we're good, that we're okay. And these people you will hear are just really longing to know that they're okay by you. And they're constantly going to seek that level of assurance from you. They're not feeling bad about themselves through the covering of someone else's approval. Does that make sense? Because mastery idols assert our goodness or avoid it, or we hide that we're not good. Yeah? The other ways that we can describe these idols are through seeing whether they are self-oriented or other-oriented. What I mean by that is that power and approval are others-oriented. If you have power as a strategy, you will dominate over others. You will try to have influence and success over others. And approval, it's others-oriented because you're needing them, right, to tell you that you're good, right? So we need others to, as part of our strategies. Versus the self-oriented strategies, control is all about putting all that burden on me and making sure that I can keep up and I can carry forth that level of responsibility and standards and certainty. Or comfort is to make sure I'm avoiding every sense of responsibility and stress, right? So there's others-oriented power and approval, self-oriented through control and comfort. So this chart here is going to help us understand that a little bit more. And the last way that we can really try to see this come together is when we consider relational dynamics. And this is where I think it's a detriment when we don't have people who are honest with us and don't give us their honest feedback of us. Because if you're unsure of some of the deeper idols, just see how it gets played out in the context of relationships a little bit. Okay, so this is a chart that we're going to use. Let's walk through it again. All right, so power, this over-desire for success, for winning and influence, what they fear deeply is being humiliated. And in fact, when their strategy fails, a lot of what you see is this anger towards expressed outward and towards others. So when people are in relationship with someone who has a power strategy, they oftentimes feel very used by them. Might even feel abused by them, right? You'll know if you are in a relationship with a power idol because you feel about this big in that relationship. Okay? Control is this over-desire for certainty, there's self-discipline, standards, and really what we aim to never experience is uncertainty, right? That is our deepest fear, which means that when we do experience uncertainty, there's a lot of worry and anxiety and concern over that. And because we like things to be done a very specific way and a standard we have to meet, oftentimes when we're in a relationship with people, they might feel condemned by us or condescended to, right? Other people could just never live up to our expectations or to our standards. When you are when comfort is your deeper idol and you have this over-desire for the avoidance of stress or pain, what you're never hoping to experience are the stress, demands, right? And oftentimes life will feel very bored or empty or irrelevant, meaningless, right? That's oftentimes the emotions that we hear from folks who have a deeper idol of comfort. But when you're in relationship with them, you're oftentimes going to feel neglected by someone that has a deeper idol of comfort. They're never really going to fully show up in the relationship, especially if it means them taking responsibility for something. Okay? So you oftentimes feel neglected by them. And the last deeper idol, the strategy, is approval, right? This over-desire for the affirmation of others by appeasing What you never want to experience is rejection, and so oftentimes they can experience feeling a little bit being cowardly, never address the conflict, right? Because conflict means that there'll be potential rejection, and we don't want that. And if you are in relationship with someone who has approval as your deeper idol, you might feel smothered by them, right? They're the friends who might text you and say, are you sure we're good? I know I said this one thing to you about 3 months ago, and I've just been thinking about that thing. And you know what? I just feel like maybe you're a little upset at me. Can we talk this through just one last time? I'm trying to be very exaggerated in my examples so that we see the points, right? So this is a way for us to better understand our strategies. Now, I gotta say this, I think in our approach, this is probably one of the hardest things for us to assess and to grow into. And so be gracious to yourself as you understand this. It takes time for us to understand this. And what I want to say about strategies before we move on is that really it is an important part of us to understand how we're going about redeeming ourselves so that we know in a very more detailed, pronounced way the level and the type of repentance that we need to experience and exercise, and how God and how we need to learn to trust Jesus more, and how that's going to determine the path of growth that I gotta take. Right? So for someone like control, man, I gotta really learn to trust Jesus in moments of uncertainty, when I really don't have control almost over anything. And I gotta learn to do less and allow things to just happen and unfold, knowing that Jesus has it. Right? So as I begin to identify a strategy, it's really for the sake of knowing what repentance looks like. And the second note, what I would not like to see over the next few hours is you walk away and say, yeah, I'm power, I'm control, and use it as a means of like self-identification, right? Because when we do that, it becomes very, that becomes our identity, and that's not the point of this. Okay? Allow this to describe how you've gone about redeeming your core hurts and shame, but not to identify you, or what's worse, right, for us to use that to simply reduce someone else to and identify and now become judging towards them based off their life. 2 minutes. Right? So I saw a lot of couples going like this when they're trying to figure out their idol. This is great marriage content. So, what I'd like for us to do is on page 10, you notice that there's a second SOSR, right? On this blank SOSR, I would love for you to fill in the core hurts, the views of self that we identified of Elsa, and just write down your guess. What strategy do you think Elsa is developing as a result? Oh, I'm sorry, so page 9 is for the first, your personal one, and then page 10 is for the Elsa one. Yeah, page 10, it should say SOSR-Elsa, okay? So take about 2 minutes, and we'll come back together. Yeah, we'll put up the one that we put up together, if that helps. And as you do that, I think you guys deserve a break. So as you fill out your SOSR, please take a 3-minute break, get water, snacks, move around, do what you gotta do now.
I have a quick announcement. First of all, I have a quick announcement about the water and the drinks. In the fridge back there, you're welcome to have any of those cans of pop and so forth, but everything that we take out of there, they count and they charge us $3. So those tiny waters are $3. So thank you, Chichi and David, went to the store and bought bottled water and the Croy for us. So if you can prefer those, please try to do that. If you want a Pepsi, we don't want to prevent you. You may have it, but try not to drink those tiny waters. Okay, thank you.
I will redeem it down to like $9. So, friends, complete Elsa's SOSR and then take a break, please, and then we'll come back together. All right? We're just doing the core hurts, strategy, and the view of self.